I wrestle with that goal. Is that goal still present? Do I still want to do that? Is that a future goal? Or should I be trying to do it now? I don't know,
Yeah.
But then I'll think about that story and it provides a measure of peace.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Oh, okay.
Called
I'm
your
ready.
eyeball.
Well, there's something in my eyeball. Jeez. Stop.
Put that on the blooper reel.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and I am here with Paul Schaefer, who can't pull it together. Paul! We'll give you a minute. Tanya Charlton is here, not helping the matter.
Sorry.
And we've got a special guest, Mr. Ian Galloway. Ian, welcome to the
Thank you.
podcast.
Yeah.
You are a familiar face in the Memoria Press office. You hold several titles, Tanya.
Oh, well, he's the editorial assistant director, but I was thinking about people have seen him in Novel Thoughts, if they've watched our Novel Thoughts series.
Yeah. Ian, you host the lovely podcast from Memoria Press, Novel Thoughts. It's beautiful. I teared up watching an episode the other day about Charlotte's Web and Wilbur and his conflict with freedom.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I was overwhelmed.
I cry at Charlotte's Web. So.
It's moving.
Yeah.
But you do that. You are the assistant editorial director. Mm-hmm. And you contribute to the Greek curriculum.
That's right.
We're always asking you Greek questions.
Yep.
You help with the filming. And what is it that you do as the assistant editorial director?
Yeah. So anytime we have to go reprint a book, one of our books that currently exists, we'll have to print for a year, maybe 2 years worth of inventory. And so I help lead that process, run that process, kind of assign things out to our other editors. And then we go in, make corrections, make updates as necessary, send that off to a printer, and then we have a whole new batch of books.
And
Nice.
they love it when I have meetings with HLS teachers because
And we have
then
a bunch of changes.
Ian gets his marching orders.
Yep.
That's
Yes,
right.
last meetings are tomorrow and Monday,
Good.
and then that's it for the
Good.
year.
Okay.
And they kick back up in September.
That's right.
Yeah. They'll be happy with everything you've done.
Yeah, they should be.
Ian. That's funny. Well, Ian, we normally go around and share a book that we're reading right now. I'll let you go last so you can think about it.
Sure.
But Tanya?
I'm still reading Bring Up the Bodies
Okay.
until we have faces. So
Okay.
nothing new here.
Okay.
When
Great
I've
Gatsby,
I've got-
it's done?
It's done.
Okay.
I've got 100 pages left in Bring Up the Bodies, and then I'm going to read Agnes Grey because I
Okay.
liked Anne Bronte so much. Have you read Anne Bronte?
I have not
I
read
keep
Anne.
asking people. You should.
Okay.
What's your deadline until we have faces?
They're having a meeting next week, so I probably should get on it.
Paul?
I'm making progress on Independent People, which is that Norwegian epic that Mitchell gave me
Are you
years
liking
ago.
it?
Yes. The very beginning, which was all about some crazy woman that died and started haunting the moors, got me a little confused at the beginning. Once you get past that and the guy gets married and then he's establishing his farm with his wife to be an independent person and not be beholden to anybody else. Then it started getting good.
I think it's really hard to start a book.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard to get into the characters. That's what Bring Up the Bodies was so much easier because I'd already been through the first book and it was all familiar because it's a million different characters and they're all historical people. And so when I started this sequel, I was just, all the hard work had been done.
Well, and I think I will probably get to the end of the book and realize how important that was.
And you have to go back and read the first.
You know, and it's like the Custom House and the Scarlet Letter.
Right.
Like you read that and you're like, what in the world? And then
that's right.
And then you read
need
the
to
story.
read it at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm reading really 2 books. I'm reading a 3rd book for fun, fantasy series. It's great. But Basic Economics, because I want to learn a little bit more about economics.
Is that the Thomas Sowell?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's very easily written, very little jargon, very easy to understand. But then also The Name of the Rose, which I have just started. And like you guys are saying, it's just hard to start. I think I started and then I haven't picked it back up.
Yeah.
But I will eventually pick it up.
It is. It's a slow start.
Yeah. And I'm trying to make a practice when I start a book, be like, okay, if I can just set aside time and get through 50 or 100 pages in a matter of a couple of days, then I know I will keep picking that book back up.
Or not.
Or not. Right.
That's right.
Right.
That's your threshold.
Yeah. I mean,
as is the case with Wolf Hall, but you gave it 200. 200.
Yeah,
that was pretty
Didn't
good.
cut it.
Not for Paul.
Nope. We've been over that on this podcast.
We have.
And various other places.
That's funny. Well, now we're going to move on to answer a listener question. And this is, we got a question from Courtney in the inbox, podcast at memoriapress.com. She asked us 2 questions. We answered one a few weeks ago. We're answering her second question now. And this one's actually directed at you, Tanya.
Okay.
She says, another question. Tanya mentioned that if she had to go back and homeschool again, she would be much more relaxed. I was hoping she would elaborate a little on how to relax, since I'm quite sure she didn't mean she would slack off in Latin or grammar. I've been considering how to add more leisure to our studies without losing the richness, and I'm wondering if some details from Tanya will help me get there.
Oh,
Can I interject here and say if there's one person in this office who
should not be talking to people about how to relax.
Yeah.
not my words, not my words.
Tanya, would you say you're pretty type A?
I am 100% type A. And I just did this church we used to, where we used to serve is doing this Enneagram study.
Yeah.
So for those of you who know, I'm an 8, which
Is that the power person?
high overachiever leader. Yes. So what I meant, I absolutely don't mean that I would be more relaxed about the curriculum that they are doing. What I would like to have done is been more relaxed internally.
Yeah.
And not so worried. I didn't really worry so much about what we were doing. I felt very good about the decision because Cheryl Lowe was mentoring me through. And so I really did feel confident. And plus, the children that my kids were around who weren't receiving a Cheryl Lowe education, I could tell that, that we were doing a great job there, thanks to her. But I was just worried about it all the time, about getting it done well. Also, getting laundry done and getting the cooking done and having a clean house. And those are the things I wish I had relaxed more with because it was going to be okay. I didn't need a perfect house in order to do this. But for me, it was really hard to let all that go. And so I would hope that the next time I did this, I would do it just like really letting myself get involved in the school day without all of the other stuff. And I think if I had been able to do that and not to feel stressed all the time about the things that weren't getting done, that I would have done a better job with my children and they would have enjoyed it more because I would have been just immersing myself with them, which I did. But at the same time, I'm running to the kitchen to fix lunch and I'm trying to get the clothes out of the washer and I kept burning food and I would leave clothes in the washer all day long that, and my husband would come home and they were still in the washer. Just stuff like that I just couldn't, I just felt like I never had a handle on. Because I think if I just could say, homeschooling was my job. And I needed to treat it like that.
It's almost like if you started your day at 8:30, you needed to say, okay, That's
all I'm doing.
I'm turning off all my responsibilities in the home, and I'm just educating until we're done at 12:30 or whatever it is.
Right.
That would have helped you a lot.
It would have helped if I had pretended it was a job. My job, I was just like now. I'm not home to do laundry or to cook dinner or any of those things. If I had had that mindset, I think it would have been a better experience for me and for my children. Now my house would have been dirtier. We may have had pizza for dinner. I don't know. But I think everybody would have benefited. So that's what I meant is I would just try to change me.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people can relate to Courtney's question because when they've got little ones that they're teaching at home and then, the other responsibilities of life just bear down on you and they're not going anywhere. Like the dinner is happening, the laundry.
Well, and you're home.
Exactly.
So it's staring at you. So you feel like you should be able to multitask. And everybody here knows I'm not a multitasker. I'm a tunnel vision, just plow through, get it done.
Yeah.
So homeschooling required me to be a person that I'm really not.
Yeah.
So
and I think a lot of homeschoolers take on that burden of because homeschooling is not seen as a job,
right.
then they can't let themselves they can't let go of this stigma of, well, you're home all day, so you should be able to get all this other stuff done.
Even society doesn't. I mean, people kept calling me and asking me if I would keep their kids because I was home. And I was like, no, we're doing school here.
Right.
I mean, do you think that I've just taken my kids out of school and we're just watching movies?
Now, to be fair, we will call all the neighboring homeschooling kids when our dog gets out because she'll only go to kids. We'll be like, can we have your kids right now? Because we don't have, like when we had foster kids too, they were at school.
That's an emergency.
Yeah, please come help us. But no, I mean, I actually saw this thing recently, and it was in the context of farming, but it absolutely applies to homeschooling of like, sometimes you say to other people something like, well, I've got to go milk the cows. And they're like, why is that important when you're not willing to go do this for me kind of thing? And they said, I need to change my vocabulary to I'm working a double or my shift is, my shift has been lengthened or whatever it is. That then people go, oh, okay. And maybe you just need to use that vocabulary sometimes
as a homeschooler, right?
Of just, well, I'm on the clock right now. I can't help you.
It is a shift kind of in maybe the narrative that people hear or the gaps they're filling in.
Well, it is because we're a society that, we're very job oriented.
Really?
So, and homeschoolers are home. So you feel like they should be doing home ed as well as babysitting other people's children and reading the Iliad.
And it's easy we were talking about this off the mic. It's easy to, some personalities, it's easy to get really critical about ourselves with where we feel like we fall short.
Right. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So
every day.
Courtney, we think you're doing a great job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I love these questions coming in.
I know. Yeah. Thank you,
keep
Courtney.
Them coming.
Yep. And they could be comments too.
That's right.
They can just comments like, I just really love Tanya's hair today. So it's podcast@memoriapress.com.
That's right.
Thank you for having that there for me to read because I can never remember it.
I know. Oh, well, on to today's topic. We are going to dive deep into a theme that runs through so many stories, and that is the theme of sacrificial friendship. Friendship is a really popular theme, but the highest form of it would be perhaps willingly giving yourself for the good of another. And we talk about this a lot on the podcast and in Memoria Press content that we are very selective about the books that we choose for our children to read because we believe that it shapes their affections and their views of the world. And so we have included some books in our curriculum that have this theme of sacrificial friendship, and we wanted to talk about those. And any other books you can think of too, because it's out there everywhere.
Yes,
yeah,
it is. We've got some examples from our curriculum.
And before we begin with specific examples, Tanya, can you help us orient with a definition? How are we defining sacrificial friendship?
We've redone several of our literature guides, and it first came up when we were working on Charlotte's Web. And Lee wrote this introductory essay that's in the front of the Charlotte's Web student guide. And so I think her definition here is really what we are going to talk about today. She says the idea of sacrifice is likely a familiar virtue to children, hopefully discussed in the context of their faith, which is where we think about sacrifice, right? It is important, however, that students truly understand the idea and know what it means practically. Sacrifice means that something must be given up. An act of sacrificial friendship is the necessary surrender of something desired for the happiness or well-being of another. Sacrifice naturally involves a loss, but importantly contributes to a greater gain.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. She's a good writer.
She is. She is. So looking at the books we include in our curriculum, which stories stand out? And this is a question for everybody.
Well, we can talk about Charlotte's Web, and we've got videos where we've talked about that. So I'm going to skip that and go over to Anne of Green Gables.
Oh, this is where I need a Kleenex box because I cry.
Anne of Green Gables, I was reading this maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, up in our editing office. So it's a kind of an open space office. You know, I'm there eating lunch and there's people around me and I'm like trying not to cry as I'm reading basically beyond, you know, the bend in the road section.
The bend in the road.
And at that same time in my life, I had for years, I had desired to go on and do a PhD.
Hang on, Ian. The bend in the road. What part of
it's the end? It's at the end.
It's the very end.
Oh, and that's when her and her friend are.
No.
No.
He's going to tell you.
Yes.
Okay, I just need to place myself in
I'll
context.
give you some more.
Okay.
So for years, I mean, my goal in coming to Louisville, Kentucky, where we're located, was to go to seminary and to go on to do high-level work in seminary. And I did a Master of Divinity, and then I went on to do a Master of Theology. And I'd always wanted to do a PhD later down the road. And I was getting towards the end of my Master of Theology experience and realizing that I have 2 young kids. I'm working a lot, and I enjoy my work, but I'm growing anxious all the time. Like I'm just kind of burning out. And I was coming to this very big bend in the road myself. And I'm reading this section of Anne of Green Gables where now, spoiler, Matthew has died and she has to make the decision. Will she go on to college or will she stay and help with the farm? And I'm just sitting there going, that's my decision. Like there's no farm that I'm helping, but I'm doing the same thing. Like I'm realizing that my life is changing and she chooses, and you should know this by now, she chooses to stay home, stay with Marilla and help Marilla. And she gives up something that's good, something that is worth having.
Through the whole book, education
has been her goal.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And she gives it up so that she can take care of Marilla. And that leads to, you know, later, not necessarily the end of Anne of Green Gables, but there's a promise of it, a life of flourishing, a life that's worth living with other people. And I mean, again, I was middle of the office lunch break, just holding my head up, trying not to cry, just wondering if people were looking at me when they weren't. I mean, I was having this moment, you know, with this book. I never read it.
Well, and you know, I once sat through a class of 6th graders reading Anne of Green Gables, and I was watching the class teach, and you could see how dialed in the boys were.
Yes.
Because it is, I mean, that tension is palpable, right?
Yes.
And it's a beautiful story.
Yes, it is. And that, you know, that's what you get with a good author.
Well, there's Ian's story, if anybody could follow that up.
Really? Can we do better than that? I've got an example from Heidi, who, if we're going to stick to the grammar school for a few minutes, who sacrifices for Granny. So when she has to go to the city, she starts stealing the rolls at the dinner table instead of eating them because the Granny doesn't have, it's not her Granny, it's a neighbor. And she saves them for her, and she doesn't realize that they're going to rot. But she hates being in the city, and she really wants to go home, and she's very homesick. But then she thinks, well, if I go home, I won't be able to get rolls for Granny, and so she's willing to make that sacrifice, even though she's just as miserable as a child can be. But she keeps saving those rolls, and it works out fine. I mean, obviously those rolls have to be thrown away, but she gets new baskets of rolls and is able to take them to Granny. But she would sacrifice anything for other people, for the people that she cares for, that she loves. She's a perfect example of a somebody who lives in a sacrificial manner, just as a little girl.
One that may be a little less gut-wrenching because it's not like a very particular moment, if you will. But I was thinking of To Kill a Mockingbird and Atticus putting his family really on the line to defend, you know, a unjustly accused man. And I mean, that's throughout the whole book, right? I mean, that's what Scout's kind of wrestling with is like, why is this such a big deal? He's just trying to defend another man. But it's through the whole thing.
And what an example for his children.
Which I actually found fascinating when Ghost had a Watchman, because then she has to wrestle with, I saw this example, but now as an adult, I don't see him living the same way, or I'm seeing it from a different perspective. And I found that one interesting, even though I don't think Harper Lee ever wanted that published.
Yeah, I kind of refused to read it
because of her
I know
wishes.
that she didn't seem to fully agree even with herself. I mean, maybe that's my interpretation, but
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of tension in that one. She doesn't really know what she wants to say, but I think that's part of the beauty of it, is that it is an unresolved question that we all have to wrestle with, is how do we then view our parents as we've gotten older?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. That's not on the topic of sacrifice, but I did.
But it is. That's what Anne did. It is sacrificial love. Maybe we should have said sacrificial love instead of friendship, because it does take all different meanings. And I mean, our ultimate example of that obviously is Jesus. So we're talking about it all the time anyway, because we're constantly studying Christian studies, and our students are living lives in a church. So they do understand sacrifice, and they do understand that kind of love. But to see it in literature that is characters that they can actually relate to, I think then hopefully will elevate their thoughts about when they do think about faith and that ultimate sacrifice.
I think that's something that makes this particular theme so powerful throughout all the literature that we read. I mean, I think it's Tolkien and Lewis and others who talk about the idea of these stories kind of all echoing one story. They're all going back to the story of Christ on the cross and his sacrifice. And so for kids who are brought up in that framework, every time they see this example in literature, it just hammers home kind of a new way to think about what sacrifice is, and a new and a new way to love the sacrifice that has been made for us from a Christian perspective. But I think that's also why books like A Tale of Two Cities have such deep and rich meaning for us. I mean, it's the story.
That's a whopper
of a man who gives his life for. I mean, he gives his life for another, and goes to the jail and exchanges clothes with this man so that he can take that man's place.
And it's not a man he loves.
And it's not a man he loves. He
does he do it for?
I think,
or does he do it for her?
I think there's a question there for sure that I think you can go for, but I think there's a respect.
But one of the stories I had written down was actually Antigone from Sophocles. So this is before, right? We've had the story, right, before Christ, and of sacrifice. And Antigone is fascinating to me because it's after the Civil War in Thebes, and two of her brothers were fighting for the throne. Both of them die. And so I think it's like an uncle of hers that gets the throne, and he decides to elevate one as like, we should honor him. And the other brother, he refuses to let him get buried. And that is an affront to the gods and to human dignity in the culture's perspective. And so Antigone decides she's going to bury her brother's body in defiance of human law. And she's willing to make the sacrifice that she knows she will probably get killed for. And so she goes and she tries to get her other sister to help her. And her other sister says, no, I can't, I'm not going to break the law. Well, and Antigone goes, buries him. They find out that it's her. And in this moment, her sister, who she tried to get involved, tries to falsely confess to save her sister. But it's clear what's happened. Antigone gets buried alive. I guess these are spoilers here. But Antigone is actually supposed to get married to the new king's son. And so he intercedes for her, and the king's like, no, not happening. And then a prophet comes and tells the king, like, you will lose, your own child if you don't stop offending the gods. And you've offended the gods by putting a live person underground and by not burying a dead person. And so he goes to then try to pull Antigone out and finds that he finds his son there. His son tries to kill him, and he gets his son's not able to, and his son kills himself.
Oh my gosh.
So I mean, it's a horrible story, tangled, horrible story. But what's fascinating about it? So Antigone ends up living. Her sister ends up living, but the new king's son and his wife end up dying. And so the people that are sacrificing for the other, and neither his son really didn't sacrifice for Antigone. He was just in this throe of passion, right? But Antigone and her sister, who were both willing to sacrifice Antigone for her brother, her sister for her, they both survive. And, there is this, so the Greeks have this idea of sacrificing for the other, and yet in their story, they have to survive because there is no hope in death, right? In the way that a Christian has.
Right.
Absolutely.
And yet, like, we're as humans, just without revelation, we see that it is a good thing to sacrifice for the other, but there's a limit, and that's what Christ comes and shows us. No, there actually is no limit.
That's right.
And I think that's what makes something like Tale of Two Cities. So the final line, it's a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known. I mean, there's the hope, but then you have King Lear. I mean, Shakespeare's saying in King Lear, like, you love your crazy father and nothing good is going to come of that, but it's still worth doing. And I think that's because it's from a deeply Christian perspective that sacrifices that even in death are still worth.
Yeah, because what does Jesus say in John? Unless a seed falls to the ground and dies, it doesn't bear much fruit. And you think about, like, even in the situations we've talked about, or maybe the places we find ourselves, our sacrifices are done somewhat in faith that they will lead to a resurrection, whether in this life or the next,
Yes.
Like, sometimes it is very unresolved.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'd like to, I don't have an answer for this, but I'd like to bring up Romeo and Juliet.
Ooh. Okay.
So it's been a long time since I've
also been a long time.
Read the story. Okay, maybe this is not something we want to broach.
Yeah. It's been a while.
But my read of what happens in Romeo and Juliet is the deaths that happen, sorry, spoiler, at the end are more ones of despair and not one of a sacrifice for the other.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right.
I never saw that as a sacrificial, like a losing of myself so that the other could rise.
Right.
I never saw it
It just feels like two teenage kids that just made poor choices.
But I think I think it's sort of a important contrast to put in because I mean I had students when I taught the Aeneid, and Dido and Virgil is sent to is told by the gods he's got to leave Dido.
That's right.
And what does Dido do? She throws herself on a funeral pyre.
Yeah.
And I had a student go, she just loved him so much. And I was like, no. This is not what love is.
Yes.
Right? And so I think it's important to kind of have that contrast of you can, in fact, sacrifice everything for something that's absolutely not worth it because you're doing it out of despair or selfishness and not out of, what did Lee say? She said, giving up for the happiness or well-being of the other.
Yes. Don't build your cross out of toothpicks.
Oh my.
Make sure that what you're sacrificing for is actually worth sacrificing for.
Is that a quote from somebody?
I don't know where I
Tanya
heard it.
Charlton.
That's great. That's great.
I have no idea.
So
don't build your
your cross out of toothpicks.
And that's why these examples that you've been giving are so beautiful. You think of Charlotte and Charlotte's Web. I know Ian passed it up, but
we
can come back to it.
Yes. So, first of all, Lee points out, which I would have skipped on to Charlotte and Wilbur, but she points out in here that it begins with Fern, who sacrificially gives her time and her energy to save Wilbur and to take care of him and to raise him. And that's where Wilbur first sees what sacrificial love looks like. And then he meets Charlotte and she really teaches him. But then he also takes over her legacy. So it just continues on, Fern sets the example for Wilbur. Wilbur continues to learn from Charlotte. Charlotte sacrifices the end of a peaceful life, what could have been just a peaceful ending to her life, to save Wilbur. And then Wilbur saves her children. So it's just like this beautiful circle. It's so perfect for an 8-year-old. But you have to point those things out.
Right.
It's not just there's a lot more in these stories that they're nice introductions because they are on a student level. The students can relate to them. But if you start hammering, then this is what sacrifice looks like. And this is, Charlotte had to give something up to save Wilbur. She had to give up what could have possibly been a longer life, but she wore herself out carving words into her web. And then she went to the fair when she just needed to stay home and have her babies. And so just that, to point out to children that I do think sometimes, we take an idealistic view with children too of the cross. And we're so careful, like with the little ones in church, when we talk about, we've talked about it at least in our children's program. We've talked about what do you actually leave the students on the Sunday before Easter? If you talk about the crucifixion, then are you just going to talk about that and wait till Easter to talk about the resurrection?
Do you let them tolerate
you've kind of got to do it as a whole with little ones. Yeah. You can't just leave it being, something that looks like a tragedy. But I do hope that these stories that are on their level help them to then be able to relate better to what was the ultimate sacrifice for them.
That's right. And they really offer a way to a counterpoint to what is really our nature, which is self-preservation.
Right. That's right. Well, and self first.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
Well, and Anna Karenina, which we talk about a lot, and
it's a big book.
It is a big book, but there's a scene in there where Levin's still an agnostic, and Levin's brother's dying, and Levin doesn't want Kitty to come with him to visit his brother, and Kitty insists, and Kitty goes, and she takes care of his brother, and loves on his brother's girlfriend, I guess.
I don't remember.
It's not and it's in that sacrificing of, because Levin doesn't even know how to approach death. He doesn't know how to approach the sickness and care for somebody who's diseased. And Kitty does all of that and also gives his brother hope. And Levin, in seeing that, is one of the two things that really brings him to faith. And it's in seeing his wife's comfortableness. What's
comfortability?
Comfortability. Just the fact that she is very comfortable serving and sacrificing in this way, that he says that this has to then be true, right? And it's that witness to him, and so prepping all of our kids to be used to sacrifice for the other, and that this is a great witness to the faith.
It is.
Well, and then talk about the perfect foil in the character of Anna herself. I mean, I'm not going to give away that ending.
Well, you might as well. We've given away every other ending for everybody.
This is an ending you ought to discover for yourself. But I mean, it's the perfect foil. It is kind of the opposite of the self-sacrificial love that we're talking about.
For herself.
It is totally self-motivated in every way.
Without hope.
Yes. Total
loss of hope.
That's right.
I was going to bring up the horse race at the beginning.
Yes.
With Vronsky. Because that is a foreshadowing.
Absolutely.
And Vronsky
just the inability
has no ability to think about the good of the other, in that case the horse.
So if anybody hasn't read it, And we didn't give a spoiler, but there's a huge clue at the very beginning when you get started.
Yes. It's very worth reading. I mean, all of these books are worth reading.
They're all worth reading. Yeah, and if you haven't read them, like you just read Anne of Green Gables as an adult, and look at the effect that children's book had on you.
33 at the time when I read it as a 33-year-old male.
So that's
I read Anne of Green Gables and was crying.
Would you say that book changed your life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I still think about it because I never really made it clear even in my story. Like I've at least put school aside for now. I finished my Master's of Theology, but I have not done what had always been a goal. And every now and then I wrestle with that. I wrestle with that goal. Is that goal still present? Do I still want to do that? Is that a future goal? Or should I be trying to do it now? I don't know, But then I'll think about that story and it provides a measure of peace.
Well, and I mean, I very much, like, my life changed because I read Jayber Crower and Anna Karenina.
Yes.
Those two books really changed my life. And
now we have sausage.
And now you can buy sausage and eggs and beef. And,
Yeah, that's right.
But I do think this is important. I want to bring up Adler's 4 questions of a reader because this is what I'm using as I'm going through orthodoxy with my students. I've mentioned in the last podcast, but I just told them we're going to use these. It's Adler's 4 questions of a demanding reader. What does the text say? What's it say in detail and how? Is it true in whole or in part? And what of it? And I think this is kind of what we're getting at is when you read one of these texts and you see the theme of sacrificial love. Now, what of it? Right? How is this, now not every book's going to change your life.
Right.
But some books will. And they should. And so, that's the question we need to, I think, be inviting our students to when we talk about this stuff. So, okay, now what of it?
And the other thing students remember is just that little phrase, the bend in the road.
Yes.
And what that means. And so then we go throughout our lives. If we understand what that means from Anne of Green Gables, then we can see all the bends in our road. And it's a nice little reminder that of things that we need to be thinking about that could be helpful to us.
And we talk about this, but how stories are such a beautiful way to make noble these characteristics. You think about how small sometimes you feel when you have to lay down a dream. And then you think about Anne and how much dignity we think Anne had.
Yes.
So there really is like a nobility or a dignity and a virtue, I think, that stories give to these actions that may seem small or hidden, but we know.
That's right.
Oh,
and
Anne was a masterpiece of a person.
She did lay down her dreams quietly.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's a hidden thing. She just did her duty.
Oh, talk about a hidden life. I mean, I just read through George Eliot's Middlemarch, and that was it. Now it's not quite it is self-sacrificial. It is I think a kind of sacrifice because you have Dorothy who has these dreams of being this powerful figure. And they use is it Saint Therese or something like that at the beginning of the novel. I don't remember.
I haven't read Middlemarch.
Well, it's worth reading because you get through it all, and the whole point is hits you in the face at the very end that it's the quiet, the hidden life, the one that's given for the sake of others and never made known.
Right.
That really is the beautiful thing.
But there was a lot of pain to get there.
There's a lot of pain to get there. Well, and I think that is. We've been we've talked about Antigone, so we've talked about some higher level texts and some Shakespeare, but we've also talked a lot about some of our grammar school texts, but some other places outside of our curriculum where I've seen this. I mean, one of the more impactful books that I've read in the last few years was Monsignor Quixote by Graham Greene, and Graham Greene is not someone you read if you've got to have a complexity of thought. So what I mean by that is not that we're super intelligent. What I mean is you probably shouldn't read this as a 16-year-old.
Right.
You probably should read this as an adult. There are adult themes throughout the book, but his whole point leads up to this climactic act of sacrifice that's also heavily
sacramental
and has this, just beautiful symbolism at the end. And I don't know. I mean, it helps you understand that you, as an adult, are going to go through things that are hard. Excuse me. That are hard, that are difficult, that are going to be suffering. Periods of suffering that may or may not result in you coming out of that suffering, well, maybe even alive. And yet it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not just for you, but for somebody else, at least.
And that's the hope, right?
I think this is the first time somebody besides me has mentioned Graham Greene on the podcast, and I'm
Happy
very
to do it.
grateful.
Yes,
Thank you.
Happy to do it.
That's funny. Oh, well, this has been a fantastic discussion. I love the literary themes podcast. We did agrarianism a couple weeks ago, this one, and we've got another one coming up. So it was great. Thank you for joining us, Ian.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Wonderful to have you. And thank you for joining us as well. We will be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.